Well, William, wherever you are, seeing me from Britain, someone who's lived beside the Great Wall for many, many years, holding one of your books and admiring the photographs of the Great Wall that you took so long ago, back in 1908. And these pictures are so familiar to me. I'm sure every one of them is embedded in your mind forever. I know it well. And as you said in the introduction of your book, that you were heading for China, you planned to make a journey all along the Great Wall, as it says on this plaque that we left with you back in 2008. And you predicted that in the future, historians would pirate your notes. And you're pretty much correct about that. What you wrote about the wall at that time went into this book, the first ever book published about the Great Wall of China. And even more incredibly, your photographs depicted the architectural diversity of the Great Wall as it crosses North China, as you followed it from east to west. So to come back here today and make this personal tribute on the occasion of the centenary of your unfortunate, untimely passing is a solemn honor to me and my wife, who is from China. So, ladies and gentlemen, I've talked about the Great Wall of Two Williams on the mountains and deserts of China, in cities across China, Beijing of course, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and around the world, in the UK, in Japan, and in America, from San Francisco to Minnesota to New York. But I'm delighted, finally, to be in Doylestown, the place where it all began. And in this talk, I'm going to tell you about how I became interested in the Great Wall, about how I managed a journey along the Great Wall in the 1980s, and how very fortuitously I was introduced to your fellow Doylestownonian, William Geil, and then how I had the brilliant idea on how William Geil and I could join forces on a journey together along the Great Wall with the purpose of influencing a better future for the Great Wall in the 21st century. Because in the 20th century in China, there were a procession of cataclysmic events that impacted on the quantity and the quality of the Great Wall strewn across its northern provinces. So, not much to cover today, but let's get going. For me, life began in Wallasey. You've never heard of Wallasey, but it begins with the word wall. I think many of you are north of 50. You are familiar with the songs of the Beatles. But do you remember Jerry and the Pacemakers?
Yeah.
And the song Ferry Across the Mersey? Yeah. Well, this is the River Mersey, and Liverpool is here, and this is Wallasey. And I was born and I grew up right there. And I went to school there. And I can really say that my first stepping stone leading me to China was directed by this gentleman, the Reverend John Patrick Macmillan. And he said, by your bedsides, children, you should have a Bible, prayer book, and an atlas. And I loved to look at my atlas. And I soon came to the map of China. And on the map of China, I saw this magical symbol. And I realized that's the famous Great Wall. And I tried to work out the length of the wall, because there and then I had decided when I grow up, I'm going to China and I'm going to make a journey on foot from one end to the other. And it became my secret for at least 2 months. And then at one of those sessions, what do you want to do when you grow up? I let the cat out of the bag. And Mackie, my headmaster, said, the Great Wall of China, that's a marvelous ambition, but you know, I don't know anyone who's been to China because there's a revolution. I had no idea what a revolution was, and I didn't care. I had my idea, and that's what I was going to do. So this is how my journey from Wallasey to the wall began. But of course, in my teenage years, I forgot about the Great Wall of China. I wanted to become a zoologist, then an Egyptologist, and then it was told if you studied geology, you could earn a good salary and get a job right after graduating in the oil field. So I studied geology. And my first posting was Egypt. I was on offshore rigs in the Gulf of Suez and then the Norwegian North Sea. And after 3 years, I decided this marine life I've had enough of that. I want normality. Back on land, the good things of life. And I was reunited with my two brothers, David Lindesay, Nicholas Lindesay, William Lindesay. Good runners, always running. Even today, we three Lindesay brothers hold the London Marathon family 3-member record with the times of 2:27, 2:39 and 2:59.
Which one was yours?
I'm ashamed to say mine is the middle one. Yes. Yeah. So, after pounding the streets of various cities running marathons, my brother Nick said to me, how about a real cross-country run? And I said, yes. And he said, following the ruins of Hadrian's Wall across England. So I bought this map and off we went on the weekend of July the 1st, 1984. And soon after taking this photograph, which is actually the only manipulated photograph in the whole presentation. The real photograph shows my brother Nick, and I've been photoshopped in. Yeah. But actually, after taking these photographs, we stopped for a chocolate bar and a drink, and Nick said to me, hey, Will, you should go to China and make a journey along the Great Wall. And the dream came alive. And since that day, July the 1st, 1984, the Great Wall has been in my brain and dominated my life. And the story began. I was fit, but I couldn't use chopsticks, and I couldn't speak any Chinese. So the local paper came up with a plan to equip me with these essentials. So we went to the oldest Chinatown restaurant in Liverpool. That's like the San Francisco of Europe in terms of Chinatowns. And Mr. Joe taught me how to use chopsticks, and his daughter taught me how to say, hello, I'm British, in Cantonese, which was completely useless in North China. Anyway, I landed in China, Planet China, as it was then, in March 1986. And these are some of the first photographs I took. And I was speaking to Richard, whose China history predates me by 9 years. But I'm sure this kind of scene is memorable for you. It was the kingdom of the bicycle, but I wasn't in Beijing to see the sights. I was in China with the ambition of making the first journey along the Great Wall on foot. And the journey began at that end, or at this end. If you can imagine a map of China here, just like, you know, a map of the US, I'm going to start way this way in the west, and I'm going to follow the wall east to where it meets the sea. And this is the very western end of the Great Wall, and you're probably thinking, not a very great wall, because in this area, the wall is made of earth, and you'll see more photos of it in a minute. But I just want to go to the next picture, because I had sponsors. Everything I carried, apart from my camera, was provided by sponsors. And I had to deliver some material to them. And I had to get a setting off photo. This picture took about an hour to get right. It was on a black and white film, and I mailed the film back to Beijing. And then my sponsor, who had a rep office there, they processed the film, they sent the negatives to Britain, my brother printed the negatives, and he chose this one and sent it to about 3 newspapers. And 2.5 months later, it appeared in the Times. A journey across China tests the nerve and feet of Britain. You'll find out what the nerve portion is about in a short while. But first of all, let's look at the wall, because I think many of you have not seen the Great Wall of China. But you have an image of it in your mind, made of stone and brick, snaking through the mountains of Beijing, and we'll come to that soon. But actually, in the far west, the first 30–40% of the Great Wall is made of rammed earth, because the builders used locally available materials. And even though the terrain is flat, it's a very striking landscape feature, providing there's a bit of shadow. I'm on my own. I've abandoned any preconceived plan of bivouacking out at night, you know, on a ground mat, in a sleeping bag and having water and bread. It's too miserable, too miserable. I've changed the plan. I am now approaching solitary farmsteads, and I'm saying, Ni hao, or Xi Yin Guoren, hello, I'm British, and a lot of sign language for getting drinks and something to eat and a rest. And it works well. Some of my most memorable Great Wall journey experiences are staying with the farmers. And these children, this is Yin Jianxi, this is Yin Lanlan, you know, I can remember their names, because I stayed with them and their parents for 2 nights. And this was a real turning point of my journey, because this family was so warm and hospitable. They were dirt poor, but they had flour, they had a few chives, they had vinegar, soy sauce, chili, and a few eggs, and the bowl of noodle soup that the mum cooked for us was just fantastic. And the weather changed, so much so that I couldn't set off on the first morning. The snow was shin deep. This picture is taken setting off on the second morning. And I went back to the wall here, which you can see standing out very clearly, and continued on my journey. And I got into these foothills, and I looked back onto this Gobi plain below with a strip of wall back to the farmstead, and I could still see the family standing there with Yin Lanlan's bright orange jacket. And I waved to them, and I thought, whoa, these people, they never expected me to rock up and ask for help, and I'll probably never see them again. But we've remained in contact with that family up until now. We've seen them pretty much every 4 or 5 years or so. Yeah. Okay, so I'm continuing along the wall, And if any of you are familiar with the geography of China, I'm in this area that would ultimately become known as the Silk Road. It's an interface between Gobi Desert and high mountains. Every picture, there's a story, but this is a particular memorable one because I was in a village. The whole of the village came to see me, and I noticed in the crowd a policeman. And the policeman was very curious, and he was making all kinds of gestures. And I thought he's saying, "Where's your ID?" and something about timing tomorrow. Anyway, that night I realized, I think he's coming back with his comrades in the morning. And I'm not going to be here. So I had my bag packed. I got up off the sleeping platform, and made my way out. The other gentleman must have thought I'm on my way to the loo. And off I went through the night. I covered about 20 miles during the night. I was exhausted, sleepwalking, and I fell asleep in this ditch. And I woke up in broad daylight and saw these three figures walking along here. And then click this picture. And as soon as they saw me, they ran over, and they must have got a hell of a shock. In those days I had brown hair. Yeah. But as they got closer and they realized this is a foreigner. And I said, "Ni hao, or Ren." Yeah. And they pointed down this track, and lo and behold, I found a farm, a couple of farms there, and they just made steamed bread. And I often wonder about those kids when they got to school and they said, "Laosha." What was that, Lushan? Oh, come down, you think Ingwaran? How would that translate? Teacher, on the way to school, we met an Englishman. And the teacher would say, "No." No, it's all stories, please. Just all stories. Okay, so it's 1987. Why is this journey possible? Because Chairman Mao died in 1976. So did his Cultural Revolution, and within 2 years, Deng Xiaoping became the paramount leader of China, and he had this vision for China to rejoin the world, and he launched Daiga Kaifang, reform and opening up. However, reform and opening up wasn't as open as it seemed. Because I soon learned with a visa, you were restricted to visiting 325 places. It sounds like a lot of places, but these were pinpricks on the big map. 99% plus of China at this time was closed to foreigners. Why? It had been closed to foreigners, China, for decades, you know? They had the warlord period, the invasion of Japan, the Civil War, Part 1, Civil War, Part 2, Great Leap Forward, Cultural Revolution. Foreigners were not in China at this time. And then Deng Xiaoping opening up China, he's thinking, the foreigner coming to China, they're either tourists or businessmen. So if a place had something worth seeing and business potential and a reasonable hotel and a reasonable bus train service, then it could be open. Everywhere else was closed. And there were apparently a few forbidden places. So for me, the real open door policy of China was pioneered by families like this. Without them, I would not have been successful. And strangely, at the end of this journey, on my return to London, I was invited to make a presentation at the Chinese embassy. Yeah, that's quite amazing. Of course, I didn't tell the ambassador the full numerical data of my journey. I said, it's been a great physical adventure. I've covered 2,500 kilometers. I think you're in miles mainly, aren't you? About 1,900 miles along the Great Wall. And I met a beautiful girl, and we got married. I'm very persistent. I asked her 3 times. I didn't mention the political adventure, the fact that I'd been arrested 9 times. I'd been detained for a week. I had films confiscated, and I was deported. And I went to Hong Kong, changed my passport, came back in, started off with a new alphanumeric identity. And back in those days, everything was on paper and nothing could be correlated or linked together. Now, you would have no chance because China is top of the league in terms of tech, and they know where everyone is and what everyone is doing. Okay, so I'm having this wonderful adventure, and eventually I meet the Dragon Wall that most people are familiar with. And this, I realize, is the kind of photograph I will have on the cover of my book. Because I know right now I'm on the edge of a great achievement. Again, this has taken about an hour, camera, self-timer, stack of bricks, backwards and forwards, using a whole film, 36 exposures, to get one shot. And it will eventually appear on the front of the book. However, this turned out to be the most important photograph I took on my Great Wall journey, and miraculously it appeared in my book. My editor said, let's have this because the snow looks pretty. And I said, no, Margaret, because the wall looks shitty. Oh, sorry, I forgot. We're in a very, sorry. Okay, and this is me, and I nearly broke my neck getting down there on a slippery slope in time for the perfect click. And I, because I'm fed up at this time. I'm cold, my feet are frozen, everything's frozen. One picture, if it works, fine. If it doesn't matter. And it appears in the book. And the book is printed. And it came out at a very, very bad time in 1989. So much so my publisher, Hodder and Stanton in London, they said, let's postpone until next year. And she and I said, we have to move on. We think we're going back to China next year. Has to be now or never. And it was good being forceful because the publisher actually allocated a decent amount of cash for us to travel around Britain, speaking on TV, on the radio, talking to reporters to promote the book. So anyway, a bit of geography before we move on to the next section. I've started here in the west, in the interior, Jiayuan, and I've had a really good run to here. I was deported from Yulin, okay, roughly halfway through, and then on my return, I couldn't return to Yulin. I chose this place, Dongshan, in a different province. So this is Shanxi province, this is Inner Mongolia. It's a different squad. Yeah, and I started off there, came down here, made my way to the sea. And the book was published, and we hit the headlines, and we became megastars because the most popular BBC TV show at that time, 8 million viewers on average, Monday and Wednesday, was Wogan, an Irishman, Wogan. And we were live on TV. She got very suspicious. I said, it's just like the TV in Liverpool, small. Yeah. But anyway, as a result of this great press blitz, the Two Williams story begins. Because Marjorie Hessel-Tiltman, she and her husband were out in the Far East as reporters. They amassed a big East Asia history, culture, literature library, including The Great Wall of China, written by William Edgar Geil. And Marjorie is saying, I'd be glad to give it to you. And there she is. And I think the book was parked on one of these shelves. And she sent me the book. And it was the British edition of William Geil's Great Wall of China. And I unwrapped it. I'd heard about this book before I went to China. And I thought, you know, what good is a book published in 1909? For me, I want to know about the logistics, the difficulty of traveling through China, waking up after these decades of, you know, Mao rulership. So I dismissed it, sour grapes. And when I opened this book, I thought, I'm not William the Conqueror, I'm William II. I really felt quite deflated. And then I thought to myself, but he was like riding mules and horses and then going up to the wall and along the wall while I was on foot. And then I thought, no, William, don't kid yourself. History will remember William Geil as the first person who made a journey along the Great Wall, and no one is bothered about the means. So, and then I began to think, wait there. It seems we have many similarities, apart from being two Williams, apart from producing two very handsome books. And I read the opening lines of William Geil's Great Wall of China, and it read, there is a Great Wall of China, so the geographies tell us, but they do not say whether it was made of stone or of china, how long it is or how long it has been. And from that I realised William Geil must have been inspired to come to China because he saw the wall on the map, just like me. And do you know what? Since 1590, the Great Wall has appeared on world maps as the only individual building. Other wonders, the Great Pyramid, Taj Mahal, Petra, Colosseum, Machu Picchu, Christ the Redeemer, these are pinpricks. The difference is the Great Wall has geographical range. It's a landscape feature. And when someone like William Lindesay, William Geil, sees this landscape feature, these curious minds think, we can get to know this feature by travelling along it. That's the difference. So, I start to thumb through William Geil's book, thinking we're kindred spirits. And then I come to this picture, and I think, I half recognise that location. Half recognise it because when I got there, the watchtower where the guards used to be garrisoned had become a pile of rubble. But it was clear, even though the angles are slightly different, he was a bit lower, I was a bit higher, or vice versa, it's one and the same place. And it's this coincidental rephotography, 79 years apart, 1908, 1987, that made me realise William Geil had seen a greater Great Wall than me. And I began to be more and more interested in him. So now I want to introduce a little bit more about William Geil's journey to you. And you know he's from Doylestown, you know he was a Baptist minister. You probably know his first journey in China was a Yankee on the Yangtze, going down the Yangtze River. A very humorous book, which I recommend to friends in China, whether they've been in China for a week or 50 years. You can learn from this book. And it was in 1908, he left Doylestown and he took railroads across the US, and then he took a steamer from San Francisco via Hawaii and Yokohama. And after 61 days, I believe, but the researchers here may question that or know
the correct figure, but according to my calculations, 61 days, he got to where the Great Wall meets the sea, which was the place he began his journey. He had not seen the Great Wall before, I believe, because when I was here in Doylestown last time, we found this letter, dated 1907, written from the British Embassy in St. Petersburg. And clearly some diplomats there had made a journey or had received photographs of the Great Wall. See here? I know this wall. I see this wall quite often. So I think William Geil, when he left his home, you probably know where this is, I've forgotten the exact address. He left here 61 days. It took she and I, my wife and I, 12 hours, not 12 hours, 14 and a half hours, Beijing to New York. We didn't come straight to Doylestown, but had we done so, we could have made the journey from the Great Wall to this town in under 24 hours. It seems, here's the name of the ship. William Geil is writing to his aunt, Emma, and we were at the cemetery today, and I think Emma's gravestone is one of those within the Geil plot, and he's writing to his aunt Emma, and he's saying, I'm going direct to Dagu, which is Shanghai Guen, where the Great Wall begins. I'm going to set off to try and complete the journey before winter. And he also complains about terrible seasickness. So this is where he began. This is Old Dragon's Head. Yeah? And it was destroyed actually by the British. And this is a photograph I obtained from a photo dealer on my last visit. And it's I think a very unique photograph. And I love this photograph because we have the wall, we have William Geil, who's very tall, taller than me. I think he's probably wearing a Stetson. And then he's with the locals because he is depending on the locals, you know, for food and water and obviously very local guidance. And he's traveling with pack mules. I was at this location about 6 weeks ago. Yeah. So it's always wonderful to go to these places, and almost a shiver goes down your spine when you think, wow, 170 years ago that photograph was taken. And anyway, after 81 days, William Geil nears the far end of the wall. And again, this skyline is very familiar. This is the Jiaiguan fortress, near the western end of the wall. And he arrives, and the fortress is with all its inns. There's no accommodation available, so he finds accommodation in this shack just outside the fortress. And then he returns to the US and he publishes his book. And he hits the headlines. After returning to the US, I believe he was ushered down to Washington, D.C. For an audience with the then President Taft. And, you know, he's been away from China for 5 years and he reports about the amazing progress he's seen. And he also predicted the coming great military clash between Japan and China. Okay, so you know what I did, you know what William Geil did, and now how do we decide we can achieve more together? Well, after his Great Wall journey, William Geil would return to China on 2 more occasions to visit the 18 great capitals of the ancient dynasties and to go to the 5 sacred mountains. I returned to China with my wife Chi in 1990. But any ideas we had about taking people on tours the whole length of the Great Wall were completely scuppered by the events of 1989 because no one was interested in going to China. But I had another good idea because I had realized that 1993 would be the centenary of Mao Zedong's birth. And I thought that would be a great sequel along the Great Wall, along the route of the Long March. And of course, publishers like this kind of book. So they gave me 5,000 quid, and she and I hopped on the Trans-Siberian, travelled through Eastern Europe as all regimes were collapsing, and it was a marvellous journey. And I fulfilled my ambition and published my book. But in 1993, I was fed up with Communist Party history, and the War of Liberation and the Cultural Revolution and Mao Zedong Trail and all that. And I wanted to get back to the Great Wall. So we moved from Xi'an to Beijing. I was working for the newspaper China Daily, and a new phase of my Great Wall exploration began. This time not on foot, but on a giant bicycle, bought from the first giant bicycle shop in mainland China for 999 yuan, which is about $150 at the time. Great bike. And every weekend, I was cycling to different parts of the Great Wall in the Beijing municipality. And to give you an idea of the size of that capital region, it's about the size of New Jersey. But it has 400 kilometers. So that's like 300 miles of Great Wall. And it's Great Wall par excellence, built in the Ming Dynasty of blocks of quarried rock with brick battlements, with towers every 100 yards or so. And it's during the course of this exploration I come up with my idea, what is the Great Wall? I say, it's more than a building. It's the surroundings, because the surroundings are the places where the builders sourced the rock, made the bricks, cut down the trees to fuel the brick kilns and the lime kilns. And the villages today have bricks taken from the wall during the revolution, and the people in the villages have stories that their ancestors told them. So this is my theory of what is the Great Wall, and I come up with the term wild wall to describe the thousands of kilometers of wall beyond those short sections rebuilt for tourism. And it's in places like this, at dawn, those golden 5 minutes of this wonderful sea of clouds, I saw photographers with the most advanced, expensive equipment, Hasselblad, the best tripods, $1,500, $20,000 worth of equipment, reloading films and just boxes, yellow Kodak, green boxes going on the ground. And then 10 minutes later, the golden light's gone, sausage wrappers, bread, all on the ground. And I started to pick up garbage. And I came back feeling very frustrated. And she said to me, forget it or do something about it. And I said, what can I do about garbage along the Great Wall? And she said, you can round up a bunch of volunteers, and you can hire a bus, and you can go and pick up garbage. So we called the Great Wall Sheraton Hotel, yes, which I think was built for a presidential visit in the early 80s. And they said yes, and we took 100 people to the wall. We spent 3 hours picking up all this garbage, and it hit the headlines. It was on front pages of newspapers, not only in Beijing, but nationwide. And it's in this way I entered Great Wall protection work. And I did a bit more. I founded a society, International Friends of the Great Wall. We put up green message signage on paths leading up to sections of Wild Wall, and we employed farmers as rangers to walk the paths and pick up garbage. And I received many awards during this time, which of course, that was because I had so much help from volunteers and my wife Chi. But all the time, I'm collecting old photographs and I'm trying to find out more about William Geil. And the breakthrough is coming because at that time, you know, I'm cycling out to the wall every weekend. I come back on a Monday morning in the office, colleagues saying, "What did you do at the weekend?" And I said, "I went to the wall." And then one colleague who's English, and obviously her understanding of Western culture was very good, she said, "Oh, William, he always goes to the wall. His wife is going to become a great wall widow." I used to play lots of golf. Do you like golf? Yeah. Yeah. And I was conscious of being away from Chi, and then we had just one boy. And I thought, I've got to have a formula for involving them in my passion. And this was it. I saw this derelict farmhouse, and then I asked Chi to go out and try and buy it. And she did, for the princely sum of about $1,500 at the time. And it became my piece of history and heaven, because from the rooms you could see a magnificent ridge. Yes. Wall-tipped ridge with towers at the peaks and the dips. Yes. And on the eve of the millennium, I made my way out of the farmhouse in darkness with a few friends, bottle of champagne in the backpack, up to the wall. And here, this is a map of our valley. And this is our wild wall farmhouse. And we went up the path here, and here I realized, although I've been up here at that time probably scores of times, because it's only 1999, the feeling was very different. I'm normally going up here at dawn, when the sunlight is, the day is breaking from the east. But going up here at midnight, there's light pollution coming from Beijing over the wall. And those towers which have windows, the light is coming through those windows looking like eyes. And, well, the watchtowers up there, built in the late Ming around 1590, had seen the arrival of several new centuries, 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900 I mused. And I began to wonder what they might witness after the arrival of 2000 in the century ahead. I was not optimistic about Genko's wallscape remaining wild and wonderful. I felt dejected, a lone individual incapable of doing anything effective. And it's at that point I realized that I could show China the deterioration of their Great Wall by going out with William Geil, with his old photograph, to consciously look for those many places where he had taken photographs. And this became what I call my millennium moment. I defined my task, his task, the two of us, to make a journey along the Great Wall in the past and the present, with the aim of influencing a better future for the monuments in the new century. So this, as you know, was coincidental rephotography, or was it destiny? I think it was destiny. I think we were always going to meet, and it happened. Well, what a journey. It was detective work. Detective work. You know, you can get books on rephotography in New York and Paris, and the photographer will say how difficult it is finding the picture of a building and standing in the middle of the road with taxis on their horns and all this. Yes, but the Great Wall, east to west, as the crow flies in a straight line, is 2,500 miles. And the twists and the turns and the double layers, the Ming Great Wall was recently surveyed and found to be 8,851 kilometers. That's 5,500 miles in length. So I had a big investigation to make. And I did it with a lot of help from my family, volunteers, other Great Wall passionates, and people in villages. Yeah, the youngsters, no, I don't know where that is. And then some old people pointing. Yeah. So the Wall of Two Williams journey begins. That's Old Dragon's Head. So we'll now see some changes. Some changes are big, and sometimes there's hardly any change at all. This particular location was very, very hard to find, and I thought there's no way this wafer-thin face of a tower is going to still be standing after 100 years. But lo and behold, it was. Very remote area, very little human impact. Yeah. Yeah. And this is the thing about this location is, makes it even more amazing, is William Geil took a picture of himself sitting there, and I had taken a picture of myself standing there. Yeah. Yeah. I started with the low-hanging fruit. I realized from in William Geil's book, and also the papers I obtained when I visited here in 2008, that William Geil came through our valley. Along the wall I've walked in some places almost 1,000 times. And that's why in this location, at least more than 100 times I've stood there and I've given a 15-minute talk on the Wall of Two Williams. And it really, you can see the reaction on people's faces, how this story really resonates with them. Yeah, yeah. This very location. Yeah. Yeah. Hardly any difference. Vegetation has become a lot thicker. Hardly any difference. These people, I think, were photoshopped in. Because, yeah, there is no way they could have yeah, yeah. So there were tricks even back in those days. This section of wall has been rebuilt. So this is quite a popular tourist location called Mutianyu. And actually, from near here to our valley, I've plotted, retraced the exact path William Geil took. And we are trying to get the local authority to create a William Geil Memorial Trail. But as you know now, the international relations scene is a bit rocky. But I believe sooner or later, cultural relations will help improve political high-level relations. And of course, with my friend, we never give up. Never give up. Yeah. This place you've seen before, yeah, in all seasons. So I was mainly active in the spring and the autumn because the weather is fairly good then. In summer, often the wall is too thickly overgrown, so you can't really see the wood for the trees. And winter, so very, very cold. So this was a very, very cold location. I was at this tower about 6 weeks ago, and there's actually a plaque in the tower saying that in 1908, the American explorer William Geil passed through here and took this photograph. Yeah. Also nearby. Now, this is the American edition of William Geil's book. And William Geil christened this section of wall the picturesque pass. And he writes here, a photograph fails to capture the beauty of this scene. You need to stay here for an hour and watch the clouds blowing across the sky and follow the shadows that they cast wriggling across the mountains and the rocks. And he loved this place. And that's why he embossed that tower on the front of his book. And there you have it. But that was 1908, and he called it the Picturesque Pass. And when I found this location, it was unfortunately the demolished Watchtower's Pass. And I asked locals in the village what happened. Because these towers were quite a long way from the village. And the villagers told me that when the Japanese, they took Manchuria virtually unopposed, and then the Chinese tried to stand the line along the line of the Great Wall, but eventually the Japanese military was too powerful, and the Chinese retreated, but villages were captured, and the villagers were forced to destroy the towers. And I said, why? And they said, because the Japanese knew the Great Wall was important in our culture, and so they wanted to destroy it. And the old people were a great source of information, not only pointing me in the right direction, but also coming up with some explanations. Yeah. Yes. So, making our way together along the wall, we eventually reached the Jiaiguan fortress, and William Geil took a lot of photographs here. I think probably he economized in certain areas. I economized because, digital photography nowadays, or with an iPhone, you're taking 100 a day. But I was limiting myself to 4 or 5 a day. I'm not sure how many pictures William Geil took per day, but I'm sure it was a relatively small number. But he really captured Jiaiguan beautifully. This is his entourage entering the gates of the fortress. That, I think, is him. And that's from the inside. And this is very important. And do any of you recognize these characters? Okay. So if you go out of town and you go down, is it Eastern Road?
Yes.
Yes. There are some traffic lights, and on a corner there's a house that William Geil built, and it was called the Barons. And you only have to stand at the gate and you can see a replication of these characters just poking their heads up above a low wall. Unfortunately, the owner of the house died last year, but I had the good fortune to visit the house in 2008. So this is a stone that stands outside the fortress at the west end of the Great Wall. Qianxia Xunguan, what does that mean? It really means this is the most awesomely defended place in the world. Yeah. Yeah. And this is actually the very end of the Great Wall. It's the remains of a rammed earth watchtower, and it seems to be an anticlimax. But you don't know what lies just beyond. There's a huge canyon. Yeah. When I went there, I was shocked. And when William Geil went there, he describes, we travelled the last few miles over the desolate Gobi plain. Balls of thorn bush were blowing. Some gazelle was scarpering. And the sound of the Jiaiguan city had faded into the distance. Yeah, and it really is a very dramatic western end to the Great Wall of China. Okay, now I also use some other photographs, and of course, a photograph like this is so easy to find because every king, president, ayatollah visiting China for the first time, they get taken here. And when I was researching coming to China in the 80s, the picture that was always turning up was of President Nixon in 1972, which really started the normalization of China's relations with the outside world. And everyone loves going there, and that was easy to retake. This picture was quite a long investigation, very strange arrangement of 2 watchtowers side by side beside a river. And eventually I found it. and it had been completely destroyed. But the good news is, on the basis of that old photograph, the towers have been rebuilt. This is the oldest photograph I work with, 1871, by the Scottish photographer John Thompson. And it was easy to find, and the changes were quite dramatic. An expressway. Yeah. Okay, so William Geil and I have been along the wall together, and what we've done is going to be very well received by the Chinese government at the time. The Beijing government gave us a venue at their new museum for an exhibition, and they funded the initial print run of a book that was the first book about the Great War written by a foreigner, translated into Chinese and printed in China. Yeah. And although we made this journey together, I was always asking myself, why don't the Americans know more about this great explorer? And I wrote to this museum and this society, and I got some polite replies to say, we only have his books and know nothing more. So it became my campaign from around about 2006 to 2008 to find William Geil the man. And I had virtually given up hope. It got to the beginning of 2008. Bookings were coming in, asking me to speak, and I was thinking, I think I'm going to be able to spare $5,000 to make a trip to Doylestown, and I'm sure I can find his grave. So I wrote to a lady, I think it was at the Mercer Museum, and I remember her name was Beth. And I introduced myself, I introduced William Geil, and I said, could you tell me, is William Geil buried in the local cemetery? And she got on a bike and she sent me a photo. And she also said, and the house that he built is looking beautiful, but it's got big gates on. You might, if you come here, you might be able to get your foot in the door and see that house. And I said, thank you very much. I'm coming over. And my plan at that time was just to come over, go to William's grave, lay a wreath, and then put a little ad in the local newspaper saying, does anyone here know anything about William Geil, the first person to make a journey around the Great Wall? And then things changed. Boom, I got this email. That one. Right. Greetings from the USA. My name is Tim Adamski from Doylestown, Pennsylvania. I'm a local historian, and my organisation has just been donated a great collection of items from an explorer 100 years ago. Boom, boom, boom. You can read it yourself. But anyway, Tim basically said there were these stack of boxes, and the first box he looked in had North China painted on it. And all the papers were about the Great Wall. So he Googled Great Wall of China, William Geil, and found scores of stories about our journey together. And so I thought, I'm coming over not by myself, but with a photographer and a cameraman. And then the second breakthrough came through, or was that the first breakthrough? The first breakthrough, sorry. That's the second breakthrough. First breakthrough is I somehow found out that William Geil, when he died, his widow adopted a little girl. And the little girl, she died in let me get this right. Mrs. Geil died in 1959. And the little girl died, I think, in 2007. And somehow I found a notice posted by a funeral home in Florida about this lady, and it mentioned Doylestown. And I thought, that could be the family I'm looking for. And I wrote to the funeral home asking, could you put me in touch with the family, and said, sorry, that's against the rules. There's a bereaved family, can't just, give out email addresses willy-nilly. So I thought, oh, crikey, what am I going to do? I've got this name, Laycock. So I asked an American friend, I said, how am I going to find a needle in a haystack in the USA? And then I explained what the deal was. And he said, Laycock, this is not a rare name, but it's not uncommon. There could be thousands. There could be tens of thousands. What am I going to do? And I just started firing away, going online, looking for Laycocks, anywhere and everywhere. I'm firing away 10 emails at a time when I had nothing better to do. And then I got a reply from Bob Laycock saying, we are the adopted grandsons, and yeah, William Geil, travel along the wall, and it's my brother, John, who is the family historian, and I'm putting you in contact. And we'll be seeing Bob Laycock and one of his brothers, Brad, in Michigan in about 10 days. Unfortunately, Father John, the historian, he died a couple of months ago. But they came to Doylestown in 2008. Anyway, so, you know, the trip to Doylestown began, and we visited the barracks, and there's Tianxia Shunguan, the calligraphy at the west and east end of the wall, and there's the lovely stele that overlooks where the wall meets the sea. At Shanhaiguan, there are the brothers, and there's the stele again, and there are the boxes, which I'm sure was Pat. Oh yeah, yes, there's the China box, yes. And then coming over, we were privileged to, I think, be among the first people to see these papers in donkey's years. And these are some of my favourite snippets. This is from William Geil's diary, and he's settling his bill, settled on June the 19th. Oh, crikey, that's like, you know, so many years to get tomorrow. Muleteers, Shanhaiguan to Nankou. So Shanhaiguan is where the wall meets the sea. Nankou is just north of Peking, Badaling. 88, and then a tip. Very traditional in the US. Tipping, yes. Yeah. Well, this is a gem, because this allows us to know exactly his route and the date. You know, in the book, the editors take bits out, and it's like, what happened there? But here, it's all aligned. This is William Geil's translation, Chinese characters, distance in li, that's like half a kilometre, and the dates, wonderful material. And then all these random jottings about heights and widths, and yeah. And this is the banquet William Geil was given at the end of his journey. Oh, yeah. And oily chicken, that's probably Kung Pao chicken, very famous dish, yeah. And then I think there's some sea cucumber. I think, yeah, I think William Geil made some comments about, well, you know, 2,000 miles from the sea, I leave that. Yeah. So then there's the sticky rice pudding, that's probably Baba fan, yeah. And letters. Yeah, amazing things. The desk, the cuttings, yeah. And the Two Williams story becomes famous in China. Chinese edition of National Geographic magazine. Yeah, this is the big exhibition in the Capital Museum in Beijing. The mayor, Professor Law, the most eminent Great Wall professor, British ambassador. Yes. Director of External Services at Shell, guided tours for the top brass, and yeah, magnificent exhibition. And it was really felt as though we achieved something when I went down and I overheard Chinese visitors looking at the material, and they would stand in front of pictures and they would say, these foreigners, they come from the other side of the world to travel along our Great Wall, and they show us how our Great Wall is being destroyed. We've got to do more to protect, and that's just what we were aiming to do. We wanted the people to sigh, to feel regret, because only these emotions would move their muscles and their minds to do something for the future. Because you know, the future depends on what you do now. The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. Yeah. So the Great Wall Revisited exhibition has been shown in 13 big locations across China. This is an outdoor location where people can see how their wall has changed. This was a most bizarre exhibition. This is the town that became a city on the wealth of natural gas. I was deported from here. But going back, when the city was open, they made me an honorary citizen. They had my exhibition in the square. They even wanted to give us an apartment. Yeah. And this was another unbelievable location, the Jiayiguan Fortress, where William Geil finished his journey, where I began my journey. And the book, I've told you about that. Yeah. A few years ago, it was the 150th anniversary of William Geil's birth, and we produced a private edition of this. I'm very sorry I forgot to bring some of these, but next time, and it's not going to be 18 years, I think it's going to be the next 2 years. He's become famous, his book has been translated, and it's quite expensive, they're very rare now, they're almost $100 a copy, these paperback copies. I've brought along 2 translations of my books with many Great Wall William stories therein. And after all the inspections in Doylestown last time, we had a centenary in the cemetery, which was very poignant on the centenary of William's journey. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with some of the old friends who are no longer with us. Judge. Yeah. I think, is this Stuart? But that's Steve Osborne, former owner of the Barons. That's Tim Adamski, it's Father John. This was an old Doylestown citizen, who was alive back in the day. Yes, so I brought over the book that Marjorie had gifted to me, because really that set the whole thing in motion. And rather than a wreath, we decided that wasn't enough. We had a bronze plaque made, and we had permission from the cemetery authorities to place it there, and we purchased a piece of Vermont granite. So if you go to the grave today, and I hope some of you can join us tomorrow at 10:30, you'll see the plaque in position there. And I remember saying a few words on this occasion. I said, well, you know, everyone is conscious on the arithmetic, you know, living a long life, which of course we all hope for. But actually, it's this that's the most important, the dash. What you make of your life, how you spend your time. And I don't think there's any greater significance to a life than achieving something that is remembered a long, long time after you've departed. And William Geil being the first person to make a journey along the Great Wall, the first person to write a book about the Great Wall. He's really the founder of Great Wall Studies. And I've learned a lot from him, and he's opened the eyes of many Great Wall passionates around the world. And the reason we are here in Doylestown and in this part of the US at this time is we think that the centenary of William Geil's death, of course, is not a happy occasion. He wasn't very old, but it's a very good opportunity to continue the campaign, to have his achievements more widely recognized, in the hope that, of course, it leads to a better protected Great Wall. And, of course, we hope it inspires people to go out to very, very distant parts of the world, to places they're not familiar with, and making achievements. So when I took my copy of The Great Wall of China back to Beijing, I thought, we need to add a note in this book. So I picked up my pen and summarized the history of the book so far at the very front of the book. And today, my wife and I are leaving the society with a number of books. And there's many 2 William stories therein. The Great Wall in 50 Objects. I chose 50 objects dating from the 8th century BC until last century to tell an episodic history of the Great Wall. And I chose, of course, to include the milestone book of William Geil, The Great Wall of China. So that's the story of the Wall of 2 Williams so far. There are a few things left to do, and a dedicated book to write, a documentary to make, and hopefully many more happy visits to Doylestown. Thank you.